Welcome back to the No Gray Areas podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCalla. Today, I sit down with one of the most resilient people I know and a dear friend of mine, Andrew Anderson. Andrew is on to share his personal story of growing up in countless foster homes, the truth about aging out of the system, and how he has persevered to turn his life into a transforming blessing to those around him. Here we go. Andrew Anderson, welcome to the No Gray Areas podcast. I love your shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
Looks good on you. Yeah, you're repping the No Gray Areas. So let me just give the audience a little background. You and I met about 10 years ago.
Yes.
And the scenario of it, so I'm going to talk a little bit and then we're going to unpack your story. But the scenario that happened was you were going to school here in Phoenix to be a chef.
Yes.
Correct? And because of the situations that the audience is going to hear, you were a day away from being homeless, basically. And so someone called me and they said, hey, it was a young woman that you were in the school with. And she called me and she said, hey, this guy's about to be homeless and I just feel like we should do something. And so I felt God saying, all right, we'll have him come over to your place. But this is the funny part of the story. And I got your permission to tell this. Yes. I didn't know you at all. So you come over that night because I just feel like God's saying, hey, you need to invite him into your house. And so you come over. I got two sons in high school at the time that are still at home, and one of them was gone for some reason. But you come in that first night, and we just start visiting a little bit. You remember you unrolled your knife set that you have as a chef, so you got all these big old sharp knives, and they're laying on our kitchen table, and you're showing them to me, and you're telling me a little about what you're doing. Well, I go down the hall then, and they say, hey, to my son, I go, son, pretty sure he's okay, but I need you to lock your door tonight. So that's kind of how our journey started together. And then you were with us for a handful of months, and you ended up graduating from there, moving on in life. And we hadn't seen each other until a few days ago for 10 years.
10 years.
I mean, we've kept up on social media some. But here's what I want to do. I want to unpack your story for our audience because you had a really rough childhood. You were in the foster system. And I don't think most of our audience knows what all that entails. The reason that you were almost homeless when I first met you is because you had no support system. That's what most people don't understand. Kids that grow up in the foster care system, they age out at 18, like you were handed a bus ticket, and then it's like you gotta go journey through life. And when something goes wrong, there's no one to call. So that was your story.
Right.
Let's go back. How did you end up in the foster system? So you were about 6?
I was roughly 6 years old. I grew up in North Carolina, and my father and my mother were at that time. They were married, but going through a divorce.
Yeah.
So right after the divorce, my mother kind of met another guy who was also in the Marine Corps, and he moved into the house. Where things started to change actually kind of drastically, to the point where there was supposed to be home improvements on the house that never happened, but the demolish of the house already had started, to the point where there was always fights and arguments and between my mom and this guy, to the point where it eventually we were getting punished for things and hit for doing, just things that normally weren't out of the place, just dealing with this guy's temper.
And when you say punished, you're not talking about in a healthy way.
No,
very unhealthy way.
Very unhealthy way.
Abusive.
Yeah, there were many times we didn't eat. We got pushed around, hit. There was a time I got caught playing with the guy's tools and stuff, and so he body slammed me on the ground and put his boot on my head. And
you're 6?
Yeah. And told me that's why you don't ever touch anybody's stuff. My sister also dealt with, a lot of the stuff in front of us. And eventually, I went to school and was going to school. We had cuts and bruises and scrapes and a lot of stuff, was going on. And they kept pulling me out of class, asking me questions. Why did I get this? Why did I get that? But I didn't want to tell them the truth at that time. I remember making up a story that I got it running through the woods, and I fell and tripped and so. I didn't know that later on, and within that week, Child Protective Services and the Marine Corps would be coming in and taking me and my sister from that house.
A bit forcefully, right?
Yeah. Me and my sister were actually kind of playing. It was early morning, and I remember sitting on the couch, messing around with something, and the front and the back door of the trailer. We stayed in a little trailer in the trailer park on base, and both doors got kicked in, and I don't know. Me and my kids, my sister started freaking out, and my mom and the guy were arguing at that time in the back room and thing. And this lady grabbed me and my sister and put us in a car, actually in separate cars, um, and we drove away. And I'm just kind of like looking back at the trailer, just wanted to be with my mom.
Yeah, yeah. And you were 6.
I was 6.
Yeah, you were 6. Your sister was older than you?
She was about almost 3 years older.
Yeah, yeah. And it was one of the difficult things in there. I mean, you had watched her abuse too. You had seen that with your own eyes many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys were taken and put in foster homes, but split up. Sometimes you were together and sometimes you were apart.
Well,
Correct?
originally, yeah, we were placed together in a foster home in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and I don't know. They decided to split us up, and it was actually a good foster home at that time. And I got moved to another place that was in a different location, different city, um, where I didn't feel like I was that as fortunate. And I was bullied by the other foster kids and also the actual kids of the foster parents, who were their biological kids. Um, I got beat, picked on, bullied, messed with, sexually, and I even was OD'd on my prescription medication at that time. I believe it was like Ritalin or something, but they gave me an excessive amount, to the point where I was in school, and prior to going to school, I didn't feel good, and I ended up collapsing in school and waking up in the emergency room. And yeah, they told me that, well, what happened, and then maybe a couple months after, not even a couple months, a month within that month, got placed in another foster home, and it felt like it was like that for years. It felt like I was meeting new foster parents, new schools, new people every so often that I never had friends. Until yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So your life from 6 years old till you're 18, you're bounced around from foster home to foster home quite a bit.
Yeah.
Separated from your sister, a lot of bullying, a lot of abuse going on.
Yeah.
You mentioned the other day when we were sharing a delicious roast beef sandwich at Portillo's.
I love it.
And we were talking, you shared with me that you to this day still blame yourself a little bit
Yes.
for being taken out of the home.
Yeah, there are times where I feel like it was my fault, that I made it harder on my mom growing up, because, her trying to get us back, but it never happened. And going outside one day early morning, and I wanted to play outside. I just, wanted to be a kid. So I remember getting on this yellow and red wheeled tricycle, made out of plastic and things. And I was like kind of riding it by the road, and a car came by and it was really close to getting hit. And the car pulled off to the side of the road and got out, and they were yelling and screaming and like, "Where's your parents? I'm calling Child Protective Services," and da 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 da. Of course, I didn't know what that was at that time, and yeah, it was within the 2 weeks that my whole life changed.
Yeah, yeah. You're 30.
I'm 34.
34 now.
34 now.
So you're telling me this is 34 years old, you've struggled kind of with that whole thing all these years, like you looking back and going, well, some of it's my fault.
Yeah.
So can I have permission to just, you know, um, shoot, sorry.
Yeah.
I think the reason, I get emotional is there's nothing that makes me more angry than to see kids hurt. But this is the life I want to speak into you with that,
Right.
Andrew. Man, you don't need to hold that. I would beg you to let that go. As a 6-year-old in a healthy world, in a healthy situation, you're not having to hold the responsibility of keeping a family together. It's not your responsibility as a 6-year-old. That's a mom and dad's responsibility. Mom and dad should be protecting. So, man, I just want to say, Andrew, I will be praying, and I hope to God you can release that and let that go, because it wasn't your fault. No 6-year-old has that responsibility. But to go back to your story, then you're in and out of homes. Longest one you were telling me when we were driving here today, the shortest stay was probably 3 weeks.
Mhm.
Longest one about a year.
Maybe at the
Yeah.
most,
So
yeah.
you're bounced around a lot. And then again, what people don't understand is someone that's in the foster system, a lot of times when they moved you, you move with nothing.
Yeah.
Like they get you and they take you to the next house, and then you're sitting around waiting sometimes for days.
Sleeping in the same clothes, or unless they give you clothes at the foster place. Yeah, none
Yeah.
of your belongings.
Yeah. And then at 18 years old,
Yeah.
this is a term that's used that I want our audience to understand. You age out of the foster system.
Right.
So again, in a healthy world, for me right now as a 52-year-old, if something happens to me, I lose my job, the worst things happen. I've got uh, a parent, I've got aunts and uncles, I've got in-laws, I've got children, grown children now. I got this whole support system built in that I can call them. That's the way life is supposed to be. But as a foster kid, a lot of times you age out at 18, and what were you given?
Nothing. No direction. Just my black trash bag with my, belongings and
And a bus ticket, you told me.
bus
They
ticket
gave you a bus ticket to go back
to go
to your
somewhere,
hometown?
and I went back to where I knew my mother was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I went back to where my mom was.
Yeah. Let me back up a little bit too. You had told me once that one of the really difficult things for you those years that you were in the foster system was your biological dad actually had chosen to get your sister.
Yeah. When I was, I want to say I was 15, 16. This just happened many times throughout my childhood and growing up. But the most, I think the most scarring time of my life is I was in a group home. It's actually one of the nicest group homes I was in,
Yeah.
with that said. But I was in a group home. And I remember, just calling my dad. I was like, "Hey, Dad, can I please come live with you?" And growing up the way that I did, I guess he was scared, or his wife was scared, and that was the excuse that he gave. But he told me that, "I'm sorry, son, you're gonna have to earn it." I never did live with my father.
Mhm.
I don't really know him that well.
Yeah. And one of the reasons he was saying that was that you were having some
I had anger issues
good
growing
anger
up.
and
Uh,
to be expected, what you'd gone through, and then bouncing around between abusive homes, you're acting out in some ways. But that's hard to hear your own dad saying, "I'm not taking you in." And you're
right.
taking your sister back.
He did. He brought her in, no problem. Gave her cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but nothing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Andrew, you just had some difficult things then since then. I know when you and I met, you lived with us for a while, and you were doing great. You still are. You're doing some amazing things. We're going to get to that in a moment. But I know you had gone after you graduated. You'd gone back home because you had kind of rekindled the relationship with your mom and sister a little bit over the years.
Yes.
And then what happened there?
Well, 14 days into like graduation, I think it was. I was in my finals of culinary school and doing capstone project, and uh, my sister my sister committed suicide.
Mhm.
So instead of celebrating during graduation, I did walk across the stage, and then I hopped on an airplane and went to the funeral. To my sister.
Yeah. And then you lost your mom shortly after, correct?
Yeah, about 5 months after that, I was doing my first job after my sister died, and working at a ski resort, doing some cooking, and uh, I finished the season, and I decided I'm gonna go see my mom, and I went down to back to North Carolina, and I booked a hotel room, and this was in October, and there was a hurricane coming up.
Yeah.
Uh, so we kind of drove through the hurricane, and I woke up the next morning, and apparently my mom fell asleep smoking a cigarette with the oxygen canisters on, and it breached the other canisters of oxygen in the room and incinerated the whole house. Uh, Killing her, the roommate, the animals, and all my belongings. Again.
Mhm. Yeah. And Andrew, thank you for your courage in sharing your story. But one of the things that we wanted to do with this, and you had agreed to share your story, is I wanted the audience to hear, because again, when we often hear, and a lot of the audience didn't have this situation, and I learned from you a lot of what kids in foster care go through. We don't realize that when they turn 18 and they age out. I mean, even though your dad had already said no, your mom and sister, you barely had a relationship, but then you lose them, and there's no support system. And a lot of foster care kids that are in foster care end up in that same situation, and the statistics are horrific, actually. And at the end of this podcast, we're actually going to give people an opportunity, a place here in Arizona that's doing some amazing work. They're dealing with kids in the foster system, but they actually have a program now for kids that age out at 18 that don't have that support system,
Hmm.
like you. I mean, you really weren't given a lot of life skills up until you were 18, and then all of a sudden you're just released into this pretty tough world sometimes, and said, "Figure it out,"
Right.
with no support. But here's where I'm so proud of you, man, Andrew. You've done pretty darn well. You figured it out. I know when we had lunch the other day, you shared with me. You said, "Man, I've done all this work the last 10 years, traveled the world. We're gonna share that in a moment. But I've done all this work. But what do I have to show for it?" And remember, we talked a little bit, and I said, "Well, the good news is, let's say God gives you another 10 years. You also get to choose. What do you want? What do you want for the next 10 years? You can make choices and do something for the next 10 years." But I also said this: you got to look back and be so proud. I mean, you have a wife and daughter now in the Philippines that you're helping to support. It's part of what you're doing with your seasonal work. You do a lot of seasonal work as a chef, so you move around to different places,
Right.
and you're figuring it out. You're figuring out. That's what I love about your story, Andrew. Is you have every excuse, and a lot of people in your situation would have taken those excuses to either be in prison, to have given up on life, and here you are. and you're fighting on. So, man, I just, huge respect. And I know our entire audience feels the same, just huge respect for you and where you're at, my friend. That first night you were at our place, too, not only did you unroll the set of knives and surprise me with that, but you're also sitting there. And again, I don't know you at all. And you're telling me, you're explaining to me a little bit about the foster system, what it's like. And you're saying, yeah, you spoke before the Senate one time. And I'm sitting there going, okay, whatever, kid. Yeah. And there was I got some pictures with some famous people, like Jamie Lee Curtis was there. And I'm, again, inside, I'm like going, okay, And then you pull out your phone and you show me pictures, and I'm like, oh, you weren't kidding. You literally spoke before the Senate about this issue. And Jamie Lee Curtis was someone that had an event that day, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was, this was May 2011. So I was 21 years old.
Yeah.
I was working for a youth mentoring company, and they also kind of helped me with my transition a little bit, just trying to figuring out where to go and getting my high school diploma and things like that. And so I started kind of told them, my story a little bit, kind of like I'm doing now. And I ended up going to Washington, D.C. and speaking at the Dirksen Senate building on behalf of the foster kids and kids in the system, that have been in the system their whole lives and don't know anything, don't know better, that are, either manipulated to grow up, with what they're taught or shown, and then just dropped out, with no guidance. And I wanted to change that because, statistically, foster kids aren't meant to survive. They're given a lot of roadblocks. And I wanted to change that. And so I went to the Senate and I spoke before them, and then I helped bring an awareness that, there's all these kids that don't have directions, and they're just, in the same shoes of what do I do?
Yeah.
And, putting pieces down as they go. But I feel like they could make better choices, and there could be companies out there that, help the transition process, that help them continue to have a dream and realize, okay, these are the steps to get there. But, and this is how, as an adult, you get to this. And so I spoke, telling them my story, and letting them know why it's important to help these kids, to fund programs, to support companies and nonprofits that help give these kids hope.
Yeah.
I think that's the, one of the biggest thing for foster kids is hope. Even if they don't realize it right then and in that moment, there's a small part of you that hopes that it's going to get better. I'm going to have a big family. I'm going to be loved. I'm going to be able to live my dreams, go to college. I'm going to be able to have give a childhood like I always wanted to another human being.
I think you're right, my friend. I think you're right, that hope. I mean, I have to say I think, because I didn't walk in your shoes, I didn't live your journey. But when you say there's just always that hope that there's things are going to get a little bit better, or that someday you can do that, and then why you want to get involved. And in fact, by the way, audience listening, it's why Andrew's here today. Because you shared with me the other day when we were sitting down and having lunch together that you still want to figure out how to help those behind you. You look back and think what you came through, and you go, I want to turn around and help. And I said, well, what if you just told your story, because you have such a powerful story, and what if we connected it to an organization that's doing that? And so we're gonna share about a local organization here in Arizona, Foster Arizona. Kim Vihan is the founder of that, and they do incredible work with foster kids in the foster system. They actually have a program that they're starting, and that's what we're going to give people an opportunity to give to, whether it's their time or their treasure, whether it's their money, that they just need financial resources, but maybe even as a mentor or going in and helping, because that's your heart, is you want to continue to give these kids some hope.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Andrew, again, why I say I'm so proud of you is what you've done. Like you got into cooking because, first of all, you're an artist with food. Oh my goodness. The great thing about having you stay with us, other than just getting to know you and finding out that you're a great dude, was some of the meals you've made us. Wow, this guy can cook. And you literally are an artist with food. But you got interested in food because
Well, I actually got interested in food. In the foster care system, I was well, we weren't fed that really good, and there's a lot of times we went, like I said, without food a lot of times, or if we did get food, it'd be like frozen meals and just things that wasn't really appetizing.
Mhm.
So I actually started cooking when I was like 7, and I would make spaghetti bolognese, and I would always make it for me and the other kids, and the kids loved it, and it was like kind of the one thing that made me, I guess, more like the popular kid,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
once they realized, oh, this he can cook, we
yeah,
don't always have to, we can always, have good food now, and
yeah.
I think that that's kind of where it developed, is the fact that I was able to do something that everyone else liked, and the fact that it was us, it was us foster kids that were you know really enjoying something, and I think that that's kind of where it grew, and I was like, actually, there's something I am good at. There's something I can do. They're not totally, lies. I can do something.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I took it from there. And as I, went through the foster care system and even till this day in my career after graduating, I took the opportunity to, learn different foods and culture and
Around the world.
from around the world.
Yes, you have. In fact, you were telling my family and I a story the other day where you literally circled the globe. You started in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
went down to Hawaii. Keep going then. Keep
I
going with
went,
it.
flew in from, I was working in Catalina, went to San Francisco and had to fly flew to Hawaii, was there for a while, and got this offer to go work
Working
in Qatar.
seasonal. Yep, yep. Then you
Yeah.
went to Qatar,
Yeah, I got the offer to
Middle
work in
East.
Qatar and Middle East and help develop a menu real quick for the FIFA World Cup that was going there prior to that year. So I went to Qatar and did that and decided that I would go and visit my wife and my daughter in the Philippines. So I continued on east and landed in the Philippines and spent about a month and some there and went to South Korea and then flew from South Korea all the way back to Los Angeles.
So you literally circled the globe. Like some people say, I circled the globe, and they mean like I went kind of halfway around. But you literally circled the
Yeah,
globe.
yeah.
That's amazing. And you have had some crazy experiences. You and I were talking too recently, and I'm putting this out there right now publicly. You're going to write a book someday. You're going to have some of your recipes in it. It'll be a
Yes.
fascinating book. You're going to have some recipes in it, and then some of your adventures. So you were at a camp in Alaska,
Yes.
a hunting camp.
Fishing, hunting.
And my son-in-law is scared to death of bears, and so you ruined his night the other night when you told some of your bear stories. Tell us just quickly the one where you're in your tent sleeping.
Oh, yes.
Well, okay, first I got to back up before because I got to help him with this.
Okay.
You get off the plane to work at this hunting camp,
Yes.
and you find out you have a secondary job. Tell the audience about that.
So I get off the plane and they give me a quick tour, and the last thing in the tour is my housing situation. It happens to be a weatherport tent, and so I'm like, okay.
They're all sleeping in cabins,
They're
and
a
you get a
nice,
tent.
nice
Yeah.
wooden cabin. I get a little tent, and I open the door and I walk inside, and I look down, and there's just pallets and pallets of dry food, rice and cereals and things like that. And I'm just, it all started to make sense, why they, off the plane handed me some bear spray and a 44 Magnum with like bear shot in it, and
So you go out there thinking you're going to be a chef
yeah.
making meals, but you're also in charge of guarding the food against grizzly bears.
Yeah, yeah. I had to protect the food, or there is, we'll all starve to death. It's
Yeah.
part of the job, and
Yeah.
if I don't do that, I lose my job.
So tell us about that one night, because this is so. I mean, I can't tell you. My son-in-law, the next morning, he wakes up after you told us the story, and he's like, "I can't believe I didn't have nightmares about bears last night." So what happened to you one night in the tent?
So one night in the tent, I'm probably halfway through. I wake up like a little nudge, and kind of like waking up, and I look over to the guy, kind of like, "What are you doing?" And he's kind of laying there on his bed with his finger over his mouth, doing just.
Like telling you, "Shh, be quiet."
And as soon as he does that, I feel a nudge, and again, on my right side here, and I kind of like glance over. I'm laying down on my cot, and I look over, and I can just see this big, gigantic shadow, and I already know it's a bear. I hear it grunting and smelling stuff and snorting, and it like kind of keeps pushing, the thing. And I'm sitting there. I'm sleeping with the 44 Magnum on me because we're all in bear country.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, I look over at him one more time, and he's just like,
Shh. Yeah.
I shook my head, it's okay, and I had my hand up here, and I kind of closed my eyes, and it nudged me again, and was like kind of moving around, and I don't know, it just kind of grunted, and then it just started to walk on by, and I kind of exhaled, and I breathed a little bit, and I looked over at him, and then I kind of glanced back, and I see the little baby bear shadow walking by, and I'm just like, I look over at the guy, and he's like, it's not over, we just, so it was a long night. I don't think I actually slept that night,
I would imagine not.
but we learned real quick to actually move our cots from the edges of the tent to the center of the tent. So we were pretty close to each other the remaining of the night, but
So you didn't have to feel bears nudging you in the
right.
middle of the
And
night.
if
Good
they were
plan.
to like rip it open,
Yeah.
at least we have a little bit of
Yeah.
time.
You have a chance to shoot it and make it more mad.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people that don't know bears or understand the whole thing with bears, a mama bear and her cub is about the most dangerous situation you can get.
Absolutely.
So when that mama bear is rubbing up against you with a tent wall between you, a little bit of fabric between you, that was not a good situation. But
No.
that's why I'm saying you got to write a book someday, because audience, Andrew had us just sitting there. We were sitting around the table the other night, my family and Andrew, and you were telling these stories one after another. Tons of great stories. When you get to Qatar, you've got half a dozen great bear stories.
Yeah.
So I think all of us would love to read that book someday. And then I can promise our audience you really want to eat some of the food
Yes.
that you make and some of the recipes that you've come up with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, we're gonna leave it today with me just giving Kim with Foster Arizona a chance to share a little bit about what they do and what she does, because it was your heart to say, hey, these kids just need some hope. And so this is an organization that I really believe in that does some great stuff. And I'd love, and I know that's your heart too, right, is to say, hey, get behind them. Giving a little bit of money, maybe giving your time in some way can have a massive impact on some of these kids and give them some hope.
Yeah, anything really, I think would definitely help, even if it's your attention, because there's a lot of that don't even get that as well. So I feel like, yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for being here today. I know when we get done sometime this afternoon, you probably can go for a walk, right?
I'm thinking about it.
They don't know what we're talking about, but this dude loves to walk. I mean, it was about 100 degrees the other day, and you said, hey, can you take me up to that
The trailhead.
the trailhead? And so I drop him off, and I'm texting him like 4 hours later. I'm like, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm still hiking. And you get back, and you think you hiked 12 or 13 miles
Yeah.
in 100-degree heat. And then
Yeah.
last night, yesterday, I dropped you
Yesterday
off
was
somewhere.
11
and
miles, yeah.
It was 11 miles yesterday again, too. So you love to walk. I'm sure you'll take some hike this afternoon. But
Yeah.
before we go, 2 truths and a lie.
Okay.
The irony of this, I'm asking you to lie on a podcast called No Gray Areas. But I know you pretty well. I don't think you're going to stump me.
I've been thinking about these all night, so I've been kind of like stumbling on them.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
But, I've been on over probably 40 foster homes, 13 high schools, or not just high schools, but maybe 20 schools in general throughout my childhood. And I feel like that's a good one to go out there.
Okay.
Let's see. When I was a foster kid, I really and not only enjoyed cooking, but I also like to do experimental dishes. Some weren't so good, and I knowingly knew they weren't good, but I honestly would just try to get the reactions out of the other kids.
Yeah. So you'd make some dishes. Some worked out. The ones that didn't, you still fed it to them.
Yeah.
I like it.
And then throughout my years in the foster care system, I think that the funniest times, though, were always the unexpected little moments. And that's always been my biggest thing, where like the small things in life. And because of the small things in life add up. So yeah, true truths and a lie is not my strong suit,
Well,
but
that's pretty good because those all sound like truths to me.
okay.
You
That's what I was going for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good because I can't imagine that you weren't doing experimental dishes and you didn't mind feeding the gross ones to the kids,
That's
especially
ac-
some of them that were picking on you. Is that the lie?
that is actually the lie.
Oh, come
See,
on.
I was too
You
worried.
did
I would have
good.
been too worried, like, we're ruining my reputation, as everybody coming to me for food.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So when you came up with an experimental dish, it wasn't good. They never
Oh,
tasted it.
I would never even mention it. Never happened.
Wow.
Sometimes, there's certain things that I would make that, like, actually it's
Yeah.
kind of good.
Yeah.
But I wasn't one to
Yeah.
really experiment with the.
Nice job, Andrew. You stumped me on that one. So you do, and I do know this one. I definitely knew that 3 was true because you do love. I've seen that in you. You love the unexpected moments and the little things in life. You just celebrate those a lot, which I think is one of the beautiful things that came out of your story. Is because you didn't have a lot, you came from a tough background. You really do celebrate and love the little things in life, and I appreciate that about you. I think that's cool. And then 40 foster homes in about 20 schools.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah, that gives people an idea again.
Mm.
That they may go like, oh, so you moved around to half a dozen foster homes?
Yeah.
Far more than that. And then imagine having to go to a new school multiple times in the middle of a year.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for sharing your story. It took courage on your part. I appreciate it. I know it's gonna have a huge impact on kids that are maybe in this situation now. And then I just got to say it again, man. I am so stinking proud of you. And I know our audience is too as they hear your story, like where you are today. I know you told me it's not where you want to be, but you got time.
Right.
You got time. I'm 52 and I'm not where I want to be.
Right.
And I know you're gonna do it. You're gonna do it because you're a warrior and you figure things out. So proud of you, my friend.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you.
Wow. What a heartbreaking yet miraculous journey Andrew shared with us. Most foster kids have a very similar story to Andrew's, more so than you may think. So if you feel like you want to make a positive impact to a foster child, would you please reach out to Kim Vihan at Foster, Arizona. Her information is linked in the description on all of our social media channels and this video on YouTube. Remember, you can make a difference.